The year is 1887. You wake on a thin straw mattress, damp with your own urine. The smell hits you first. Unwashed bodies, feces, rotting food, carbolic acid, and something else, something indefinable but unmistakably human decay. It's dark but not quiet. Screaming echoes from somewhere down the corridor. A woman's voice, hoarse from hours of crying. Someone nearby is laughing, high-pitched and endless. The sound burrows into your skull. You're not a criminal. You haven't committed a crime. Maybe you were sad after your baby died. Maybe you spoke back to your husband. Maybe you were epileptic or foreign or just inconvenient. It doesn't matter. You're here now, in the asylum, and you're probably never leaving. There are no individual rooms, no privacy, no dignity, just a hall lined with iron beds where 60 women lie in various states of distress, dressed in identical gray institutional gowns that hang loose on emaciated frames. An attendant walks past your bed. She doesn't look at you. To her, you're not a person anymore. You're a lunatic, less than human, an animal to be fed, occasionally hosed down and forgotten. This is the asylum, not the sanitized version from movies, not the gothic romance. This is the real thing. The place where society sent the inconvenient, the different, the broken. And what happened inside these walls was far more disturbing than any ghost story. Welcome back to another deep dive into the darkest corners of history. If you're new here, this channel is dedicated to exploring the brutal, honest truth about the past in exhaustive detail, perfect for learning or for drifting off to sleep. If that appeals to you, consider subscribing. Hit the like button if you want more institutional history. Leave a comment telling me what dark corner of the past I should explore next. Tonight, we're entering the world of psychiatric asylums from the 1800s through the mid-1900s. These weren't hospitals in any meaningful sense. They were warehouses for the unwanted, prisons without trials, places where you could be locked away for decades based on the word of a single doctor, a frustrated family member, or even a husband who wanted a more convenient wife. We'll walk through every aspect of asylum life, the admissions process that stripped away your identity, the treatments that ranged from useless to torturous, the daily routine of crushing boredom and occasional violence, the staff who were often as disturbed as the patients, and the few who escaped to tell their stories. This will be thorough, this will be dark, this will take time, so settle in, get comfortable, and let's step through the doors of the asylum, doors that for most who entered, never opened again from the inside. To understand the asylum, you need to understand what came before. For most of human history, there was no such thing as a mental hospital. People we'd now call mentally ill lived with their families, wandered as beggars, or were locked in local jails. Medieval Europe had a few institutions for the mad, but they were rare. Bedlam Royal Hospital in London, founded in 1247, became infamous by the 1700s as Bedlam, a place where the public could pay a penny to gawk at the inmates like animals in a zoo. The modern asylum system began in the late 1700s and early 1800s, born from a strange mixture of genuine humanitarian impulse and social control. Reformers argued that the mentally ill deserved treatment, not imprisonment. Philippe Pinel in France and William Tuke in England pioneered moral treatment, the idea that kindness, routine, and healthy environment could cure madness. Pinel famously unchained the inmates at the Bitchesay Hospital in Paris in 1793. It was revolutionary. For a brief period, small private asylums offered genuine care. The York Retreat, founded by Tuke in 1796, housed patients in a countryside setting, encouraged productive work, and treated them with dignity. Recovery rates were promising. The era of moral treatment seemed like progress. But moral treatment was expensive. It required low patient-to-staff ratios, pleasant grounds, individualized care. As industrialization accelerated in the 1800s, as cities swelled with immigrants and the poor, as families disintegrated under economic pressure, the number of people labeled insane exploded. Society needed somewhere to put them. The answer was the state asylum. In America, Dorothea Dix crusaded throughout the 1840s for states to build asylums for the mentally ill, who were often kept in horrific conditions in jails and poorhouses. Her efforts succeeded. Between 1840 and 1880, virtually every state constructed massive asylums. They were architectural marvels, imposing Victorian structures set on hundreds of acres outside cities. Kirkbride plan asylums, designed by psychiatrist Thomas Kirkbride, followed a specific layout, a central administrative building with wings radiating outward, maximizing light and air, surrounded by therapeutic grounds.
They were built for hundreds, Within decades, they held thousands. Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts opened in 1878 for 600 patients, held 2,400 by the 1940s. Willard Asylum for the Chronic Insane in New York, opened in 1869, became a small city with its own farms, railroad, power plant, and cemetery. These weren't hospitals, they were total institutions, closed worlds where patients were expected to spend the rest of their lives. Who were these patients? That's the disturbing part. Yes, some had what we'd recognize as severe mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression. But diagnosis in the 1800s and early 1900s was wildly subjective. Moral insanity could mean anything. So could melancholia, mania, hysteria, neurasthenia. Women were committed for excessive sexual desire or reading too many novels. Immigrants who didn't speak English were labeled confused. Epilepsy, which is neurological, not psychiatric, accounted for a significant percentage of asylum populations. The admission process was shockingly easy. In many states, a single doctor's signature was sufficient to commit someone indefinitely. Family members could petition for commitment with minimal evidence. Husbands committed inconvenient wives. Adult children committed aging parents to seize their property. The poorhouse system fed people directly into asylums. If you were poor, foreign, non-conforming, or just unlucky, you could find yourself behind asylum walls with no legal recourse. Once admitted, you were stripped of your identity. Your clothes were taken and burned. You were bathed, often roughly, in communal tubs. Your hair might be cut short or shaved entirely. You were assigned a number and a ward based on your perceived level of disturbance. Your belongings were locked away. You put on the institutional uniform, shapeless, identical, marking you as inmate, not person. And here's the crucial part. Getting out was nearly impossible. Families who committed relatives often never visited. The stigma was too great. The asylums were too far away. Or they simply wanted you forgotten. Patients who insisted they were sane were exhibiting lack of insight, a symptom of mental illness. If you were calm and compliant, you were too sick to leave. If you protested, you proved you were dangerous. It was a perfect trap. By 1900, America's asylums held over 150,000 people. By 1950, that number reached 560,000. State mental hospitals became the largest institutions in most states, with their own farms, factories, dairies, power plants. They were hidden cities of the unwanted, largely invisible to the outside world. And what happened inside was about to get much, much worse. Let's walk through a typical day, because the first thing to understand is the crushing, relentless monotony. You wake at dawn, not because you want to, but because attendants are walking through the ward, shouting, sometimes striking bed frames with sticks. There are no curtains. Light comes through high barred windows, dim even in summer. You sleep in a hall with 50 to 100 others. The beds are iron frames with thin mattresses, sometimes just straw ticking. They're spaced perhaps 2 feet apart. No privacy, no personal space. If someone screams in the night, you hear it. If someone soils themselves, you smell it. The windows are rarely opened. The air is thick, hot in summer, freezing in winter. You get up. There's no bathroom attached to the ward. Instead, there are chamber pots or a single toilet room for 100 people. You wait in line. There's no toilet paper or very little. No soap, cold water, if that. Bathing happens once a week if you're lucky in large communal tubs. The same water is used for multiple patients. Attendants stand by with hoses, spraying you if you resist. It's not about cleanliness, it's about control. Breakfast is brought to the ward on metal carts. You eat in the day room or at your bedside. The food is institutional, oatmeal, often burned or undercooked, bread, stale, weak coffee or tea. Everything is lukewarm by the time it reaches you. Meals are the same every week. Monday's menu repeats endlessly. Variety doesn't exist. Flavor doesn't exist. Food is fuel, delivered with the minimal possible expense. If you're ambulatory and considered working class, meaning not too disturbed, you're assigned labor. The asylum is self-sufficient. Someone has to maintain it. Men work the farms, tend livestock, shovel coal, repair buildings. Women work the laundry, sew institutional clothes, clean wards, peel potatoes in industrial kitchens. This is presented as occupational therapy, good for your mind. In reality, it's free labor. State asylums saved enormous sums by using patient labor for every conceivable task. If you refuse to work, you're labeled uncooperative and moved to a backward. Backwards are for the chronic insane, those deemed hopeless. Conditions there are worse, much worse. Less food, less
Heat. No activities, just existence. If you're not assigned work, you sit. You sit in day rooms, large halls with wooden benches around the perimeter. No cushions, no comfort. Some asylums had rocking chairs, a small mercy. You rock, back and forth for hours. It's something to do, a rhythm to fill the emptiness. Many asylum photographs show patients rocking in unison, a ward full of people swaying like a strange machine. There are no books in most wards, no newspapers, no radios until later, nothing to occupy your mind. If your family sends you something, it's confiscated or stolen. Attendants might take it, other patients might. You own nothing, you are nothing. Lunch arrives, more institutional food. Stew, often unidentifiable meat and greasy broth, potatoes, boiled vegetables, gray and mushy, white bread. Everything is soft because many patients have dental problems that go untreated. If you have teeth removed, and many do because dental care is non-existent, you get the same food, just more of it boiled until you can gum it down. Afternoons are more sitting. If the weather is decent, you might be led outside into an airing court, a fenced yard where patients walk in circles. The fence is high, there are no benches. You walk or you stand, then you go back inside. Fresh air, rationed like everything else. Some asylums had occupational therapy rooms. You might be given simple tasks, sorting buttons, winding yarn, folding laundry. Busy work, nothing meaningful, nothing that teaches a skill, just tasks to fill time and make the institution run smoother. Evenings bring dinner, more stew, more bread, weak tea. Then you sit again until bedtime. Lights out is enforced, often around 8 or 9 p.m. You lie in the dark, listening to the sounds of 100 troubled people trying to sleep. Someone is crying, someone is muttering, someone is screaming. Night attendants walk the halls. Sometimes they're kind, more often they're indifferent or cruel. You sleep, you wake, you do it all again, day after day, week after week, year after year. The sameness is its own kind of torture. There's no hope of change, no progression, no milestones, just endless grinding routine. Your mind, which came here troubled, finds no healing in this environment. It deteriorates. The asylum doesn't cure madness, it creates it. And that's if you're in a good asylum, one that's merely neglectful. In the worst asylums, in the overcrowded wards of the 1920s and 1930s, conditions were far worse. Patients slept on floors. They went naked because there weren't enough clothes. They were fed from troughs. They were beaten regularly. They froze in winter and baked in summer. They died in significant numbers, and their bodies were buried in unmarked graves in the asylum cemetery. Mortality rates in asylums were staggering. Tuberculosis swept through overcrowded wards, dysentery from poor sanitation, influenza, typhoid, pellagra from malnutrition. Patients died from neglect, from infections and restraints, from injuries inflicted by staff or other patients. Death rates in state asylums often exceeded 10% annually. In some institutions during some years, it was higher. You had a better chance of dying in the asylum than recovering. Now let's talk about what the doctors did to you, because this is where it gets truly disturbing. Remember, psychiatry in the 1800s and early 1900s was barely a science. There was no understanding of brain chemistry, no effective medications, no evidence-based treatment. Doctors experimented on captive populations, trying everything from the merely useless to the actively harmful. Start with hydrotherapy, one of the most common treatments from the 1880s through the 1950s. The theory was that water could shock the system into sanity. In practice, it was torture. Continuous baths involved placing patients in tubs of water for hours, sometimes days. The tub was covered with canvas, leaving only your head exposed. The water was kept at body temperature. You couldn't get out. You ate in the tub. You urinated and defecated in the tub. Attendants changed the water occasionally. The purpose was sedation. You emerged weak, compliant, and broken. Cold water treatments were worse. You were wrapped in wet sheets, then cold water was poured over you. Or you were placed in a tub of ice water, or subjected to high-pressure hoses. The shock was supposed to jolt you back to sanity. Instead, it caused hypothermia, cardiac events, terror. Patients died during hydrotherapy often. Then there was mechanical restraint. Restraints were used constantly in asylums, not just for dangerous patients, but for anyone who was inconvenient. Straitjackets, which bound your arms across your chest and laced up the back, were common. You could be left in a straitjacket for hours, days, weeks. Your circulation was cut off, your muscles atrophied, your shoulders dislocated. Leather cuffs and straps were standard on every ward. Wrists and ankles strapped to bed.
Frames. Some patients were restrained to their beds for years, lying in their own waste, developing pressure sores that became infected and gangrenous. Restraint wasn't medical treatment, it was convenience for understaffed wards. Isolation rooms, called quiet rooms or seclusion cells, were small rooms, often windowless, with nothing inside except perhaps a drain in the floor. You were locked in, sometimes restrained, sometimes naked. The purpose was to calm you. In reality, sensory deprivation induces hallucinations, panic, breakdown. Patients emerged from seclusion worse than they entered, which justified continued confinement. Lobotomy deserves its own discussion because it's perhaps the most horrifying medical practice in modern history. Developed by Portuguese neurologist Antonio Egas Muniz in 1935, the prefrontal lobotomy involved severing connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex. The theory was that mental illness resided in these connections. Destroy them, cure the patient. In 1936, American neurologist Walter Freeman began performing lobotomies in the United States. Freeman was a zealot. He believed lobotomy was the cure for all mental illness. He refined the procedure, developing the transorbital lobotomy in 1945. This ice pick method involved inserting a thin instrument through the eye socket, above the eyeball, puncturing into the frontal lobe, and sweeping it back and forth to sever nerve fibers. It took 10 minutes, no operating room required. Freeman performed it in his office, in asylum wards, even in a van he drove around the country. Between 1936 and the late 1950s, approximately 40,000 to 50,000 lobotomies were performed in the United States. Freeman alone performed around 3,500. The patients weren't told the risks. Often they didn't consent at all. Families signed the papers. State hospital administrators, desperate to control overcrowded wards, authorized mass lobotomies. The results were catastrophic. Some patients died during the procedure. Many developed severe complications, seizures, incontinence, inability to control emotions, loss of executive function. They became docile, yes, but also blank. Lobotomy didn't cure mental illness, it destroyed personhood. Patients emerged as shells, capable of basic functions, but robbed of whatever made them human. Rosemary Kennedy, sister of President John F. Kennedy, received a lobotomy in 1941 at age 23 for mood swings and rebellious behavior. The procedure left her permanently incapacitated. She spent the rest of her life institutionalized, unable to walk or speak coherently. She was 86 when she died in 2005, having spent 64 years as a living cautionary tale of what asylums did to the inconvenient. Insulin shock therapy was another nightmare. Developed in 1927 by Manfred Sackel, it involved injecting patients with large doses of insulin, inducing hypoglycemic shock and coma. The theory was that the shock would reset the brain. Patients convulsed violently. They suffered brain damage from the induced comas. Many died. Those who survived often had no memory of their lives before treatment. It was used extensively through the 1940s and 50s, despite no evidence it worked. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, still used today in modified form, was introduced in 1938. Original ECT involved placing electrodes on the temples and running high-voltage electricity through the brain, inducing a grand mal seizure. Patients weren't anesthetized, they weren't given muscle relaxants. They seized so violently that bones broke. Spinal fractures were common, teeth shattered. The memory loss was profound and often permanent. By the 1940s and 50s, ECT was used constantly in asylums, not as last resort treatment, but as punishment and control. Acted up, ECT. Refused to work, ECT. Complained about conditions, ECT. Some patients received ECT hundreds of times. The cumulative damage was devastating. And then there were the experimental treatments that never made it into textbooks because they were too absurd or too cruel. Doctors injected patients with malaria to induce high fevers, which supposedly cured syphilis-related psychosis. They removed teeth and tonsils, believing infection caused insanity. They performed hysterectomies on women, believing the uterus caused hysteria. They castrated men to calm sexual aggression. They injected turpentine into muscles to cause abscesses, draining toxins. None of it worked. All of it caused suffering. The driving force behind these treatments wasn't cruelty, not exactly. It was desperation combined with hubris. Psychiatrists had no effective tools. They had enormous populations of suffering people. They had medical authority and captive subjects. So they experimented, publishing papers, attending conferences, winning prizes. Egas Muniz won the Nobel Prize in 1949 for lobotomy, the Nobel Prize, for a procedure that destroyed tens of thousands of lives. Let's talk about the people who ran these institutions, because understanding the staff helps explain how such conditions persisted for decades. Asylum workers fell into several categories, and few of them were qualified in any meaningful sense. At the top were the superintendents, always doctors, usually men. They were psychiatrists, though that term in 1900 meant something very different than today. They had medical degrees but little to no specialized training in mental illness. Their job was less about treatment and more about administration. They ran institutions housing thousands, managed budgets, negotiated with state legislatures for funding, and maintained public relations. Some superintendents were dedicated, humane men who genuinely believed in moral treatment and fought for their patients despite limited resources. Others were incompetent bureaucrats or outright sadists who used their positions for personal gain, conducting unethical experiments or embezzling funds. Many fell somewhere in between, well-meaning but overwhelmed, gradually worn down by impossible conditions until they stopped trying. Below the superintendent were assistant physicians, often young doctors fresh from medical school, taking asylum positions because they couldn't establish private practices. They made rounds, wrote notes, authorized treatments, but had little time for individual patients. One doctor might be responsible for 500 patients. Actual interaction was minimal. Treatment decisions were made based on ward reports from nurses and attendants, not personal evaluation. Nurses in asylums were different from hospital nurses. In hospitals, nursing was professionalizing with training schools and standards. In asylums, especially state institutions, nurses were often just attendants with slightly more authority. Some had training, many didn't. They supervised attendance, dispensed medications, handled paperwork. In better institutions, they advocated for patients. In worse ones, they were as abusive as anyone else. The real power in asylums resided with the attendants. These were the staff who actually interacted with patients daily. And this is where things get very dark, because asylum attendant was one of the worst jobs in America. The pay was terrible, the hours were long, the conditions were appalling. You worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer, in overcrowded wards with violent, unpredictable patients. There was no training. You were handed keys and told to maintain order. Who took these jobs? The desperate, immigrants who spoke little English, people who couldn't find other work. Some were genuinely compassionate, drawn by a desire to help, but many were the dregs of the labor pool, alcoholics, petty criminals, people with violent tendencies who enjoyed having power over the helpless. Attendants were supposed to supervise 50 to 100 patients. They were supposed to prevent violence, ensure cleanliness, distribute food, maintain order. But they were outnumbered, exhausted, and given no tools except force. Restraints were the primary method of control. If a patient was agitated, you strapped them down. If they were violent, you locked them in seclusion. If they were inconvenient, you sedated them with chloral hydrate or paraldehyde, drugs that turned people into zombies. Abuse was endemic. Patients were beaten regularly, kicked, slapped, punched, hair pulled, faces shoved into walls or floors. These weren't isolated incidents. They were daily occurrences on many wards. Attendants called it maintaining discipline. Superintendents looked the other way because the alternative was chaos and understaffed wards. Sexual abuse was rampant and underreported. Female patients were assaulted by male attendants, orderlies, even doctors. Male patients were assaulted by other patients and staff. There was no oversight. No one believed the patients if they complained. Who would take the word of a lunatic over a staff member? Some attendants developed genuine relationships with patients, became protective, advocated for better treatment. These were the exceptions. Most attendants became calloused. You couldn't maintain empathy in that environment. The patients weren't people anymore. They were the epileptic in bed 23 or the screamer in the side room. Dehumanization was a psychological necessity for survival. Staff turnover was astronomical. People quit after days or weeks, unable to handle the conditions. This meant wards were always staffed by inexperienced people who had no idea what they were doing. Institutional knowledge didn't accumulate. Abusive patterns persisted because no one stayed long enough to change them or cared enough to try. And then there were the patients who worked. In every asylum, certain patients became trustees, given special privileges and authority. They might supervise other patients, help with ward tasks, even discipline troublemakers. This created a hierarchy among inmates, with trustees acting as informal enforcers for staff. It also created opportunity for abuse. Trustees could torment vulnerable patients with impunity. One particularly disturbing practice was using violent patients to control other patients. If someone needed to be restrained or moved to seclusion, staff would summon the strongest patients to do it. These patients, often psychotic themselves, would beat and drag the victim while attendants watched. It saved staff the effort and gave violent patients an outlet that kept them from targeting staff. Investigations occasionally exposed these conditions. Journalists went undercover, former patients published memoirs, reformers inspected institutions and issued damning reports, but change was slow or non-existent. State legislatures underfunded asylums. The public didn't care. The patients had no advocates, so the abuse continued, year after year, generation after generation. Some stories from inside the asylums became public, and they're worth examining because they reveal the system's cruelty in specific human terms. Start with Nellie Bly, the journalist who went undercover in 1887. Elizabeth Cochran, writing as Nellie Bly, convinced doctors she was insane and got herself committed to the Women's Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell's Island in New York. She spent 10 days there, then published her exposé, 10 Days in a Madhouse, in the New York World. Bly described conditions in horrifying detail. Patients were beaten by nurses, food was rancid and insufficient, baths were ice-cold torture sessions. Sane women were kept indefinitely because doctors refused to believe they'd been wrongly committed. Bly herself found it disturbingly easy to maintain her act because questioning your own sanity was treated as proof of insanity. Her articles caused a sensation. Grand juries investigated, the asylum budget was increased, performers were promised, but lasting change was minimal. Blackwell's Island continued operating under poor conditions for decades. Bly's exposé revealed a fundamental truth. People cared briefly, then forgot. Zelda Fitzgerald, wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald, spent much of the 1930s and 1940s institutionalized. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, though modern analysis suggests bipolar disorder. She underwent insulin shock therapy repeatedly at Highland Hospital in Asheville, North Carolina. In 1948, a fire broke out in the hospital's main building. Zelda was locked in a room on the top floor. She and 8 other women burned to death, unable to escape. She was 47. Rosemary Kennedy's lobotomy in 1941 we've mentioned, but the details are important. She was 23, living in a convent school, mildly intellectually disabled but functional. She had mood swings and was beginning to express interest in men. Her father, Joseph Kennedy, feared she'd embarrass the family. Without telling his wife, he authorized Dr. Walter Freeman to perform a lobotomy. Freeman drilled holes in Rosemary's skull while she was awake under mild sedation. He asked her to sing and recite the Lord's Prayer as he inserted a spatula-like instrument and began cutting. When she became incoherent, he knew he'd cut enough. The procedure left her with the mental capacity of a 2-year-old. She was institutionalized and hidden from the public until the 1980s. She became the family's shameful secret, the cost of Joe Kennedy's ambition. Frances Farmer, the actress, was institutionalized repeatedly in the 1940s. Her story became legend, much of it exaggerated, but the core is real. She was committed to Western State Hospital in Washington, a brutal institution. She underwent insulin shock therapy and electroconvulsive therapy. She claimed in later interviews that she was raped by orderlies and assaulted by staff, though she recanted some allegations. Whether she received a lobotomy is disputed, but the popular narrative says she did, leaving her a shell. What's verified is that she spent 5 years in Western State, emerged in 1950, and her career was destroyed. She worked as a hotel clerk. She did occasional TV appearances. She died of esophageal cancer in 1970 at 56. Her life a tragedy of what happens when a difficult woman meets a system designed to break her. In 1946, Life magazine published Bedlam 1946, a photo essay by Charles Lord showing conditions in mental hospitals. The images were shocking: naked patients in filthy wards, lying in their own waste, restrained to beds, staring blankly at cameras. One photo showed a patient in a straitjacket standing against a wall, defeated and dehumanized. The article called it a national disgrace. Public outcry followed, congressional hearings, promises of reform, and again, little changed. The institutions were too large, too entrenched, too far from public view. Albert Deutsch, a journalist, published The Shame of the States in 1948, documenting his visits to state mental hospitals. His descriptions read like reports from concentration camps. Patients naked, crowded into day rooms, no heat in winter, minimal food, staff using
violence casually. Deutsch wrote that conditions in some wards were worse than what he'd seen in Nazi camps at the war's end. This wasn't hyperbole. The neglect and dehumanization were comparable. One case that haunts is that of Anna Agnes Green, a patient at Rivercrest Hospital in Illinois. In 1949, she was found dead, her body covered in over 100 rat bites. She'd been tied to a bed in an unheated room and forgotten. Rats had eaten parts of her flesh while she was still alive. The attendants responsible received minimal punishment. The hospital continued operating. Judith Meisel was 9 years old in 1945 when she was sent to Letchworth Village in New York, an institution for the intellectually disabled. She wasn't disabled, she was epileptic, and her immigrant parents couldn't care for her. She spent years there, subjected to medical experiments, including radiation treatments that later caused cancer. Letchworth Village was exposed in the 1960s for horrific conditions and experimental programs. Judith survived and sued New York State in 1996, one of thousands of victims. The Willowbrook State School in Staten Island became infamous in 1965 when Senator Robert Kennedy visited and called it a snake pit. Conditions were medieval. Children with intellectual disabilities warehoused in overcrowded wards, lying in filth, ignored by staff. In 1972, local news reporter Geraldo Rivera filmed an exposé inside Willowbrook that shocked the nation. His footage showed naked children in cages, rocking endlessly, covered in sores, surrounded by feces. Willowbrook wasn't unique. It was just the one that got filmed. Similar conditions existed in institutions across the country. The exposés kept coming, decade after decade, and change remained glacial. The asylum system was built on fundamental misunderstandings of mental illness, and examining these reveals how pseudoscience and prejudice shaped treatment. In the 1800s, the dominant theory was that insanity resulted from moral failure or environmental stress. The brain was seen as an organ that could become exhausted from overuse, particularly intellectual overuse. This brain exhaustion theory led to rest cures, where patients were confined to bed for weeks or months, forbidden from reading, writing, or intellectual stimulation. The idea was that rest would allow the brain to recover. In practice, it caused muscle atrophy and depression. Phrenology, the pseudoscience of reading personality from skull shape, influenced early psychiatry. Doctors measured patients' skulls, noting bumps and depressions, claiming these revealed criminal tendencies or moral deficiencies. Asylums kept collections of patients' skulls, studied after death. None of it meant anything, but it gave psychiatry an air of scientific rigor. The eugenics movement, which gained popularity in the early 1900s, had devastating effects on asylum populations. Eugenicists argued that mental illness was hereditary and that the feeble-minded were reproducing faster than the intelligent, threatening racial health. The solution was forced sterilization. In 1907, Indiana passed the first eugenic sterilization law. By 1940, 30 states had similar laws. Asylum patients were sterilized by the thousands without consent. California alone sterilized over 20,000 people in state institutions. The procedures were often botched, causing infections, chronic pain, death. Women had hysterectomies. Men were vasectomized or castrated. The justification was preventing them from passing on defective genes. This wasn't fringe science, it was mainstream, supported by the Supreme Court. In Buck v. Bell, 1927, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough," upholding Virginia's forced sterilization law. That decision has never been overturned. Diagnosis was arbitrary and culturally biased. Dropotamia was a diagnosis in the 1800s for enslaved people who tried to escape, classified as mental illness. Hysteria was used almost exclusively for women, blamed on the uterus, and could mean anything from anxiety to sexual desire to simply being difficult. Immigrants were diagnosed with mental illness at far higher rates than native-born Americans, often because they didn't speak English or didn't understand interview questions. Homosexuality was classified as mental illness until 1973. Gay men and lesbians were institutionalized, subjected to conversion therapy, electroshock, aversion therapy involving induced vomiting or electric shocks paired with same-sex images. None of it worked, all of it caused trauma. Many died by suicide during or after treatment. Masturbation was considered both a cause and symptom of insanity. Patients caught masturbating were punished, sometimes restrained permanently, sometimes surgically altered. Boys were circumcised without anesthesia, girls went under clitorectomy. The medical literature of the era is filled with discussions of preventing masturbatory insanity.
The theory of focal infection held that mental illness resulted from infections in teeth, tonsils, or internal organs. Thousands of asylum patients had all their teeth extracted, their tonsils removed. Women had ovaries removed. Men had colons partially resected. Dr. Henry Cotton at Trenton State Hospital in New Jersey was a zealot for this theory.
Between 1918 and 1930, he performed thousands of surgeries, removing teeth, tonsils, colons, claiming high cure rates. His actual cure rate was 0. His mortality rate was 30 to 45%. He was never charged with anything. He died in 1933, honored as an innovative psychiatrist. The idea that mental illness was visible in physical form led to extensive cataloging. Asylums photographed patients obsessively, creating archives of the insane. These photographs were used in textbooks to illustrate different types of madness. Patients were posed, labeled, turned into specimens. The photographs are disturbing not just for what they show, but for their clinical detachment. These were people, but they're presented as specimens, examples of pathology. Racial theories infused everything. Black patients were diagnosed with different forms of mental illness than white patients. They were more likely to be labeled with aggressive or animalistic conditions. They were housed in separate, worse wards. They received fewer resources. Medical literature of the era is filled with racist assumptions about Black psychology, intellectual capacity, pain tolerance. Indigenous people forcibly removed to boarding schools and then to asylums suffered particularly. Trauma from cultural genocide was diagnosed as inherent mental deficiency. They were experimented on at even higher rates because they were seen as less than human. All of this was done under the banner of science, published in medical journals, taught in universities. The asylums were laboratories of pseudoscience, where captive populations provided subjects for theories ranging from misguided to evil. The asylum system didn't end suddenly. It decayed slowly, then collapsed catastrophically, leaving wreckage we're still dealing with. The first cracks appeared in the 1950s with the introduction of psychiatric medications. Chlorpromazine, marketed as Thorazine, was synthesized in 1950 and introduced for psychiatric use in 1952. It was the first effective antipsychotic. Patients with schizophrenia who'd been violently psychotic for years suddenly became manageable. The chemical lobotomy could sedate patients without destroying their brains. By the late 1950s, state hospitals were using these medications extensively. Ward populations became calmer, the need for restraints decreased. Doctors began to believe that mental illness could be managed outside institutions. The idea of deinstitutionalization was born. Close the massive asylums, treat people in community settings with medication and outpatient therapy. This was humanitarian in theory. In practice, it was a disaster. States saw an opportunity to save money. Asylums were expensive. Closing them and shifting patients to community care was cheaper, but the community infrastructure was never built. Federal funding was inadequate. States closed hospitals faster than they opened community clinics. The Community Mental Health Act of 1963, signed by President Kennedy, promised a network of community mental health centers. Fewer than half were ever built. Funding dried up. States continued closing hospitals anyway. The numbers are stark. In 1955, state hospitals held 560,000 patients. By 1977, that number dropped to 160,000. By 2010, it was under 40,000. Where did those 500,000 plus people go? Some went to nursing homes, often in worse conditions than the asylums. Some went to boarding care homes, private facilities with minimal oversight. Many went to family who couldn't cope. Huge numbers became homeless. By the 1980s, city streets filled with visibly mentally ill homeless people. They were the asylum patients, released with a week's worth of medication and nowhere to go. Others went to prison. America's prisons became the new asylums. Today, the 3 largest psychiatric facilities in the U.S. are jails: Cook County Jail in Chicago, Los Angeles County Jail, and Rikers Island in New York. Incarcerated people with mental illness receive minimal treatment in environments even worse than the old asylums. The exposés of the 1960s and 70s accelerated closure. Geraldo Rivera's Willowbrook report in 1972 led to lawsuits and a consent decree closing the institution. Similar lawsuits targeted hospitals across the country. Courts found conditions unconstitutional, ordered improvements, but states chose closure over funding improvements. Psychiatric medications improved through the 1960s to 1990s. Antipsychotics became more effective with fewer side effects. Antidepressants, starting with Prozac in 1987, offered new treatment options. The medical model of mental illness became dominant. Mental
Illness is a brain disease, treatable with medication. This reduced stigma in some ways, but also medicalized normal human suffering. What remained of asylum buildings? Most were abandoned. These massive Victorian structures, too expensive to maintain, sat empty. Some were converted to other uses: colleges, condos, museums. Many were demolished. Some still stand, decaying, surrounded by chain-link fences, windows broken, walls crumbling. They've become urban legends, haunted sites for ghost hunters. But they're not haunted by ghosts. They're haunted by history. The suffering that occurred within those walls was real and immense. Hundreds of thousands died there. Millions spent years locked away.
The buildings are artifacts of a century-long mistake. A system that promised care and delivered warehousing, promised healing and delivered harm. The asylum cemeteries remain too, often hidden in woods behind former institutions. Thousands of graves, marked with numbers, not names. These are the patients who died institutionalized, whose families never claimed their bodies, who were buried in cheap coffins in mass graves. At some sites, the markers have been bulldozed. The dead are forgotten twice, first in life, then in death. Modern psychiatric care is better. Medications work, therapy works, but we've replaced one problem with another. Instead of mass institutionalization, we have mass incarceration of the mentally ill. Instead of asylums, we have homelessness. The system fractured, but the underlying problem, how society treats its most vulnerable, remains unresolved. Some people survived the asylums and told their stories. Their testimony is crucial because it gives voice to those who were silenced. Elizabeth Packard was committed in 1860 by her husband, a minister, because she disagreed with his religious views. She spent 3 years in Jacksonville Insane Asylum in Illinois. She was sane, and she knew it, but that didn't matter. She documented conditions, organized patient protests, and fought for her release. After finally getting out through legal channels, she spent the rest of her life advocating for patient rights and married women's legal protections. She published books detailing her experience and successfully lobbied for laws requiring judicial hearings for commitment. Clifford Beers was committed multiple times in the early 1900s for depression and paranoid ideation. He survived restraints, beatings, suicide attempts. After his release, he wrote A Mind That Found Itself in 1908, a best-selling memoir detailing asylum conditions. He founded the mental hygiene movement, advocating for reform. His work led to improved conditions in some institutions, though change was slow. Dorothea Book, committed in 1936 in Nazi Germany at age 19 for depression, was forcibly sterilized and survived attempts to euthanize her under the Nazi T4 program that killed over 200,000 disabled and mentally ill people. She lived until 2019, spending decades advocating for psychiatric survivors and against coercive treatment. Judy Chamberlain, committed as a young woman in the 1960s, became a leader of the psychiatric survivors movement. She wrote On Our Own, Patient-Controlled Alternatives to the Mental Health System in 1978, arguing that patients should control their own treatment. She fought against forced medication and institutionalization until her death in 2010. Kate Millett, the feminist author, wrote The Looney Bin Trip in 1990, describing her commitments and forced treatment for bipolar disorder. She argued that psychiatry was used to control non-conforming women, that diagnosis was political. Her work influenced critical psychiatry and mad pride movements. These survivors share common themes in their testimony: the trauma of being stripped of autonomy, of not being believed, of having your reality denied by everyone around you. They describe the difficulty of reintegrating into society, the lasting effects of institutional trauma, the way being labeled mental patient follows you forever. Many couldn't speak. They died in institutions, their stories lost. Others left hospitals so damaged they couldn't articulate what happened. The survivor testimony we have represents the stronger, luckier few who escaped and could process and communicate their experiences. We've spent 2.5 hours walking through the asylum, from admissions to treatments, from daily life to final abandonment. It's been dark, disturbing, relentless in its catalog of human cruelty and systemic failure. But it's important because this isn't ancient history. The last large asylums closed in the 1990s. People alive today spent years institutionalized. The consequences of this system persist. What can we learn? First, institutions of total control, no matter how well-intentioned, tend toward abuse. The asylum was designed to help. It became a machine for warehousing and breaking people. Second, society's treatment of the mentally ill reflects its
Values. When we devalue certain populations, when we see them as less than human, atrocity follows. Third, medical authority isn't infallible. Doctors performed lobotomies, sterilizations, brutal experiments, all with the blessing of law and science. Skepticism of unchecked authority is necessary. The asylum system failed because it tried to solve social problems through segregation and control. Mental illness exists, yes. People suffer, yes. But locking them away in massive institutions, stripping their rights, subjecting them to experimental treatments, that wasn't care. It was convenient for society. Out of sight, out of mind. Today we face different challenges: homelessness, mass incarceration, inadequate mental health services. These are the inheritance of deinstitutionalization done badly. We closed the asylums, but never built what was supposed to replace them.
So people cycle through emergency rooms, jails, streets, crisis to crisis, never receiving sustained care. The asylum is gone. The need for compassionate, effective mental health care remains. We're still figuring out how to meet that need. The mistakes of the past should guide us, but only if we remember them. If you're still awake, thank you for walking through this difficult history with me. If you're drifting off, I hope these words have carried you toward rest. This channel exists to explore the parts of history we'd rather forget, to give voice to those who were silenced, to understand how we got here. Subscribe if you want more. Like if this satisfied your curiosity or helped you sleep. Comment with your thoughts or suggestions for future topics. These stories matter. The people who suffered in asylums matter. Remembering them is the least we can do. Sleep well, dream gently, and remember that behind every institution, every system, every authority, there are individuals whose dignity must be protected. History judges us by how we treat the vulnerable. The asylum system failed that test catastrophically. May we do better. Good night.